the scene. He's got the voice that's mean, asking those questions that you never seen. He's got that fire, burning bright and clean. Andrew Keen making waves, break the routine on the Keen on show. He brings the heat, asking the minds, digging deep till they bleed. No sugar-coated truths, no lies to deceive. Andrew Keen, the master of the interview beat. He's got the knowledge, he's got the flair, challenging ideas with a fearless stare. With every question, he's uncovering what's there. Andrew Keen, a truth seeker, he's aware.
Hello, everybody. It's just another day in the rather lurid history of business. If you look at the pages of the New York Times, all sorts of articles about the incompetence and perhaps immorality of Boeing, the breakup of Google because they're too strong. There's a big story in the Financial Times about their new Starbucks new CEO being awarded a $113 million pay deal. And then there's a story in The Guardian of an entrepreneur misusing £150 million worth of investments, stealing from a UK counsel. What it all suggests is there isn't much of an ethical imperative in business. Most business people seem self-interested, and most of us are troubled, chilled by the power of some of these large companies like Boeing and Google and Starbucks. However, my guest today might disagree. Andrew C.M. Cooper is an executive, a lawyer at Meta, and he has a new book out, The Ethical Imperative, Leading with Conscience to Shape the Future of Business. And Andy Cooper is joining us from Atlanta, where he lives. Andy, are you suggesting in the book that business is ethical or needs to be ethical?
Oh, well, I'm definitely suggesting that it needs to be ethical, and certainly in order to survive the future as younger workers become executives and have a bigger impact on the bottom line for businesses.
But why would we ever think that businesses should be ethical, Andy? They're just not. They're focused on their own profit. That's their purpose. Whether it's Boeing or Starbucks or Google or your own company, Meta, they pursue their own interests. Why can or should they be ethical?
Well, I think it's clear that businesses should be ethical because in the absence of ethics, there is rot. And that rot could be social rot, it could be political rot. And at least in the United States, we are experiencing more and more of that as companies become more powerful, individuals become more wealthy, the political system becomes more attuned to just the needs of a few. When that happens, the communities that are supported by those businesses become less important to the political class, and ultimately the economics become so strained that people who live in those communities suffer. And ultimately, businesses will suffer if they don't tend to those communities that really are their bottom line.
But in historical terms, Andy, reform of business has always come externally. It's always come from government. A lot of people have argued that the 2020s are rather like the 1890s when you had these hugely powerful companies, and then you had the cartel busters, you had Teddy Roosevelt, you had all sorts of regulation. Do you have any models in your book or in your thinking about businesses which have a genuine ethical imperative?
Oh, absolutely. So there are a number of examples in the book, but I point, for example, to Bombas. Bombas, a wonderful company that has the mission of, in their words, warming the feet of the homeless. But what Bombas does in their model is for every sock that is purchased through them, they donate a sock to a shelter. And that's because the Bombas's founder, when he was deciding how to build a business, he learned that that shoes or that socks were the most requested item inside homeless shelters. And so it was Randy Goldberg, and Randy said, you know, what I want to do is create a company that not only makes a profit, but is also solving a social ill. And in doing so, has created not only a cycle where he's a positive cycle, where he's helping to alleviate an issue, but has also created a very fervent fan base that will support the business. And so this is the way you create sustainability in a model that is not just focused on profit, but it's also focused on people.
We did a show a few years ago, Andy, where someone made a similar argument about a British beer company. And since then, this beer company has been in all sorts of scandals. I mean, you talk about Bombas. It's an interesting company. As you say, one of their clever marketing campaigns is to give away socks. But I have two responses. First, it's a small company. And secondly, this is a very self-interested initiative. It doesn't necessarily reflect an ethical imperative. It reflects a self-interested imperative dressed up in ethics. And I use that dressing up carefully because, of course, it's encouraging people to buy their socks.
Well, I would push back in that, in the sense that all business is involved in the idea of making profit, but that doesn't mean that in and of itself, that objective is unethical. There are really two prisms that you have to think about when you're thinking about ethics. One is the why I am doing a thing, and the other is how I am doing that thing. And so when you look at companies like Bombas, the why is both laudable and also a moral goal. But then you've also got the how they do it. So doing it in a way that is sustainable, though it inures to the benefit of their shareholders and their bottom line. They do check those two boxes of doing business in a way that is ethical. I'll give you another example. I used to work as an analyst with Coca-Cola, and large companies. You made the point that Bombas is small. There are ways for even large companies to do business, make money, but also do it ethically and for the right reason. So when Coca-Cola decided, hey, we're going to move into India, their operations took a major toll on the water sources there, the fresh water sources. And so Coca-Cola embarked upon a water reclamation and replenishment initiative that now sees it being a net contributor to the water resources in that country. So, and it actually stands as a model for other companies to do business in a way that is sustainable, especially in countries like India with large populations and limited resources. So I think I'm arguing in the book that young people want to see organizations that are not just focused on the classical economic, the Milton Friedman-esque view of doing business, but are really thinking about people at its center. And that's what the ethical imperative is. It's really about doing business that in a way that prioritizes people over profit.
Again, that sounds like marketing talk to me, Andy. You bring up Coca-Cola. I mean, some people might argue that if Coca-Cola was in any way ethical, it would shut itself down because its products are profoundly bad for people. But even the water stuff you bring up, I don't know enough about the India example, but Coca-Cola's Dasani brand has been very controversial. They're currently facing an investigation over green claims in Hungary. So isn't this all just, I don't know, greenwashing, ethical washing? You come up with two examples, one of a small sock company and the other of Coca-Cola, which is enormously controversial.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's greenwashing. I actually think that in order for societies to thrive, there has to be really strong job creators and people who are actually additive to the public, to the social good, and companies have a role to play in that. One of the examples that I talk about in the book is when I worked as the general counsel for UPS Airlines during the COVID pandemic. And what we found during COVID is that the government alone was not able to deliver COVID vaccines and therapeutics to communities that needed them. And so they tapped the integrators, the large integrators, FedEx, DHL, UPS, to assist in this really laudable goal. And the truth is that large and competent organizations are necessary in order to meet the challenges that the 8 billion of us that live on this planet need. And so the argument in the ethical imperative is that, yes, you'll be able to find examples of where there are corporate excesses. In fact, I don't try to cover up those corporate excesses at all. In fact, I point out some of them. But those are not necessarily the rule, and they don't have to be the rule if we are raising up leaders within these organizations that truly care about people and communities.
Again, I have to admit, I'm very unconvinced. In my experience, I have a tech background like you. You currently work for Meta. Large tech companies like Meta and Google and Amazon, Apple have very, very bad reputations for being self-interested. Some people argue that it's social media that has actually undermined the mental health of a whole generation. Where's the evidence of an ethical imperative when it comes to big tech in the 2020s?
Oh no, it's a great question, and I don't think anyone would argue that there are arguments to be made on either side when you talk about any company. You know, I run a small micro market business, and you could say, oh, well, you offer candy in your vending machines, and therefore you contribute to teeth rot. But the truth is, there are also arguments on the contrary, right? Like if you are offering micro markets in communities that don't have grocery stores, you could say, hey, well, in addition to offering the occasional sweet, you also offer healthy options, frozen options, and options that are not available. I think the same arguments can be made for large companies, particularly in the tech space. So in one way, there have been great advancements that resulted from social media, for example, the ability for people to communicate ideas and share ideas that otherwise in the past had to go through filters that were created and controlled by really powerful interests. And so if you are someone who believes in free ideas, in the spread of those ideas to the masses, it would argue then, stand to reason, that there's an enormous social good that comes from platforms that allow people to do so.
Andy, why did you write this book, The Ethical Imperative, Leading with Conscience to Shape the Future of Business? We've had a number of books like this on the show. I have to admit, as you can probably tell, they get on my nerves a bit because I think, firstly, they tend to be self-serving one way or the other, and they're also wrong. What's behind this book for you? It's your first book. Yeah. Your day job is as a lawyer.
Yes.
Why write this book? What are you saying that hasn't been said before?
So I grew up in a small rural town in South Carolina. I think some people would call it meager beginnings. I grew up on a dirt road in a single wide trailer. And I wrote this book to give voice to those people who come from similar communities who are frequently overlooked. And also for the emerging leaders within organizations that are often overlooked, because those people in those communities, like I came from, have something to say about business, and so do emerging leaders, even though they may not be in the C-suite. They also have something to say.
Andy, but J.D. Vance came probably from a fairly similar background to you. He's running with Trump.
Yes.
He has a very different take. So I don't see the connection. I mean, I respect what you've done, and it's meritable, if there's such a word. It's impressive to get from the dirt road to a senior job at Meta. But what's the connection between that and corporations having an ethical imperative? Corporations aren't in the business of social engineering, are they, or should they be?
I think that now we're talking. I think corporations should be in the business of engineering outcomes in communities like the community I came from in Walterboro, South Carolina. So the first two chapters of the book is called Forgotten Towns and Forgotten People. And the idea is that the town of Walterboro was flourishing when business was there. And when corporations began to extract more from those communities than they were putting in, those communities faltered. And in the place of prosperity, there was poverty. In fact, I talk an entire chapter about the various theories on poverty and what causes them. So there is a connection between ethical business practices and rural communities, because all too often large organizations overlook investment in these places because they have fallen.
Andy, I think we've lost your sound.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I suggest in the book is that there is a need for organizations, when they do network planning, when they do their investment plans, to look at places that are failing, faltering, and invest in the same ways that Hershey did in Hershey, Pennsylvania, or Walmart did in Bentonville, Arkansas, or even Chick-fil-A on the south side of Atlanta. That there are ways to intentionally find and invest and create prosperity, and companies should be doing those things.
But isn't that strategy controversial? Some people might suggest that it's the role of government to encourage companies. Amazon's been doing a rather clever dance with governments in terms of where they set up their new offices. I know they got a lot of money out of the urban government of New York. It's been quite controversial. Isn't that the role of government rather than corporations? The governments understand, for example, that small towns need investment, so they would incentivize companies to open offices there?
There's a level at which I agree that governments do have a role. They have a place in this discussion. Whether or not it is the sole role, I think, is where I part ways. I do believe that companies that are parts of communities, they use community roads and air and water, also have a role to play and something to say, because there's an outsized burden on communities when companies are engaged in operations. But then there's also a obligation for companies that are operating in these spaces to contribute more and to assist in the planning of prosperity rather than to just take.
We are speaking with Andrew C.M. Cooper, otherwise known as Andy, the author of The Ethical Imperative. His day job is at a little Silicon Valley startup called Meta, but he's also a first-time writer. I want to remind everyone that interesting guests like Andy Cooper are brought to us because of our friends at Liberty, a quarterly of culture and politics. Going to run a short feature on liberties, and then we'll be back with Andy Cooper to talk more about corporations and ethics. Don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe to Liberties at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking with Andy Cooper, the author of The Ethical Imperative. First half of the show, Andy, you suggested, I'm quoting you here, corporations should be in the business of social engineering. Does that mean that they should also be in the business of DEI, of encouraging diversity and equity and inclusion in terms of what they support and who they choose to employ?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'll answer it this way. I think organizations have an obligation to build open systems as much as possible, which allows for anyone, no matter where they come from, to be a part of their mission and to elevate within it. I think that's a laudable goal. I think it's a basic human could expect. And so if we're talking about social engineering in that regard, then I would suppose the answer is yes, there is a place for organizations to break down those places that are systemically barriers for groups of people. Now, whether or not organizations should be in the part of creating quotas or set-asides and things like that, I think society, at least in the United States, has broadly rejected that argument, the idea that a merit-based system should prevail over all else. But the problem is that we don't have today a merit-based system. Lots of organizations engage in hiring people that are friends of friends, of pulling only from elite institutions, and really only looking for talent in places like the big cities and not necessarily in Walterboro. So I do think that there's a role to play even in that regard for large organizations.
Andy, we've done lots of shows with professors from business schools on this theme. Some of them argue that the moral direction of America, for better or worse, is dependent on corporations. They tend to teach courses at fancy business schools like Harvard and Stanford about ethics. Are you skeptical of that, or do we need more ethics professors and ethics classes at places like Harvard and Stanford Business School?
No, yes, I do. I think we need more classes at Harvard Business School for sure. There are really only four things, and I talk about them in the book, that organizations should focus on today to lead with conscience. The first is speed. They have to really focus on decentralizing decision making and moving more quickly for the benefit of their employees and communities, because those who get left behind lose workers, and ultimately have to do mass layoffs. They have to focus on inspiring the workers.
Sorry to jump in here, Andy.
Yes.
Speed. The guy who runs your company, a certain Mark Zuckerberg, famously said, move fast and break things. Are you suggesting that you can move fast and not break things?
I don't think it's a necessary result of moving fast that something must be broken. But it is possible to move fast and not break things. It's not the breaking or the not breaking or the breaking of things that matters. I think it's the effectiveness in moving quickly for the purpose of saving jobs and saving people and adjusting for the future. For example, we are in the midst of major demographic changes in the United States, generational changes, and so on. Organizations that rely on 15, 20-year time horizons to mature a worker into a manager or a senior leader are going to miss out on some of the most creative generations currently in the workforce, which means when you're talking about planning who should be the manager, perhaps looking at that Gen Z is not necessarily a bad thing. That's moving fast in what would previously have been seen as unthinkable.
So, Andy, in our age of AI, where smart machines are replacing people for better or worse, there's a great debate about whether it will create new kinds of jobs. But a lot of very influential economists worry about the implication of AI on jobs. Are you suggesting that the ethical company, the company with a conscience, should always choose the person over the algorithm?
No, I'm not suggesting that. And I actually listened to your last podcast or previous podcast on AI, and there was a back and forth with you in the interviewee about this topic. I actually think it can be ethical to deploy and engage AI systems, particularly when they are alleviating mundane and menial tasks that people spend hours and hours on for very little benefit. In other words, the labor is low value. AI systems can be engaged for the purposes of freeing up creativity and allowing people to do more high value work. They can also be used. There's some studies about AI in judging in the judicial system, where making decisions based bail decisions and other decisions can be taken off the judge, and you get a less biased, a de-biased result by using these systems. So no, I wouldn't suggest that an ethical company would always choose to forego the implementation of AI or new technology.
But who's to determine, Andy, whether or not a job is appropriate or not? People choose these jobs. They get replaced by machines. Corporate executives, their ethics department cheer themselves up, make them feel virtuous by saying, well, these are dirty jobs, which people shouldn't want. But they choose to work them, and they need them to support their family. So who's to say whether a job is a good one or a bad one?
Well, I wouldn't characterize it as good or bad. I think it's a matter of how much is the effort that is put into the job valued at in the market? What is the value that's placed in the market? And if the market places a low value on a particular work, and it can be automated, then the obligation on the government, as we've talked about previously, and on these large organizations, the ethical choice would be to then retrain or to re-equip and upskill individuals who are in these roles so that they can transition to ones that have a higher value.
But how would that work if Google, for example, lay off an entire generation of data analysts with their AI or OpenAI? Are they obligated to retrain these people? They would simply say, well, it's not our fault that people are losing their work, in the same way as the inventors of the steam engine weren't responsible for re-employing the people whose businesses were based on the horse and cart.
Yeah, no, there are really two approaches here. One is having a view of where the technology roadmap is moving and proactively engaging with those workers who are employed by the business to reskill them in transition as the technology gets rolled out. But then the other piece of it is governments being involved in both the understanding of the new technology that's being developed and the offering of resources to both companies and communities to engage in the types of education and skill transition that's necessary. We went through a whole generation where we told young girls, you need to learn how to code. There are all these organizations that pop up, girls who code. And now we are seeing the advent of supercomputers that can code themselves. And now all the people we told, hey, you need to go code. The question is, well, what good is that skill now when a computer can do it? Or how can we transition that skill into something that is more useful? And so now you see more prompt engineers that are starting to roll out, that are being transitioned and reskilled, and also people moving more into the creative space. So even though systems are now becoming more creative, there is a large group of people who only want to buy human created and human implemented things. And so I think it's dynamic as technology develops.
Again, the example you used for an ethical company was a sock company called Bombas, which you write about in the book. But when it comes to big tech, you're in the big tech business. You work for Meta. My wife works for Google. I've got lots of friends working for the other big tech companies. None of them strike me as being particularly ethical. They're self-interested, and everything they do is to pursue their own self-interest and raise their stock price. Do you have any examples of large tech companies who are in the ethics business? Mark Benioff claims to be, although again, we did a show on Davos Man, and critical show on what Davos Man was like, and he was Exhibit A for Mark Goodman, the New York Times writer who authored Davos Man.
Yeah, again, I think, it's hard to pull a specific company and say that's an unethical company and another to say that is purely an ethical company, because the idea of generating profit is not inherently unethical. But I do talk about in the book about Amazon and how Amazon, when they went into some of their smaller communities in Alabama, in Georgia, and gave healthcare to workers as on day one, which in many logistics companies is not necessarily like a day one thing. You may take a few months before you get it, and how that actually ended up saving a woman named Carla's life, who days after starting a job with Amazon realized that she had a disease that needed thousands and thousands of dollars of healthcare. And so I think what I'm positing here and in the book is that though companies may be big like Google or Meta, they are not these leviathans that are inherently taking away from the community, but that there's more that can be done. And that when companies elevate ethical leaders, or what I call conscientious executives in the book, more of those positive things happen. And that's what I would like to see at Google and other places.
Again, it's all a bit fuzzy. It sounds the product of a marketing department. Andy, let's talk about Amazon. Amazon is notoriously anti-union, spent millions of dollars trying to convince courts that people who work for Amazon shouldn't be allowed to join unions. They're also pioneering surveillance technology in their warehouses. On the other hand, as you suggest, they're a massive employer. They provide low-paying jobs, but nonetheless real jobs for hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of workers in America. I was in Wisconsin recently. There was a huge Amazon warehouse. Again, people aren't forced to work in it; they choose to work in it. What advice, if senior Amazon people are watching, what advice would you give, or would you like to give, if they read your book, The Ethical Imperative, to Amazon executives? Should they allow their workers, for example, to join unions? What is it about unions that are so hostile to corporate interest?
Yeah, well, I certainly don't take a position on such controversial issues in the book, but I do.
Why not? I mean, isn't that the central issue of workers' empowerment? Why wouldn't you take a position on that?
Well, it's because that it's an issue that I think as a society we are working through to decide what protections are necessary
No, we're
and which
not,
are not.
Andy.
Well, I'll give you an example.
Well, some people are in. Let me just finish. You come back at me.
Sure.
Right. Some companies like Amazon and many other big tech companies are hostile to unions and allowing their workers to join unions. Others aren't. It's more than a debate. It's a battle between pro and anti-labor people. Most of the anti-labor people tend to be within corporations.
Well, I don't know if I don't know if that's true, the anti-labor people, but yeah, what I was going to say is you can look at the history of the world, almost the history of societies through the prism of labor and labor rights. So it's almost axiomatic that the rights of people and to have the results of their labor is a conversation that we are evolving as a society. There have been periods where labor laws were very lax and children were dying in factories at 8 and 9. And then there are times when things have gotten dramatically better. I think we live in one of those times now. And as we continue to have the conversation, there's the question is, how involved will government be in ensuring that people can organize and whether or not that should be a right and what the law should be around organizing. So that's why I don't take a position on that.
But
because
again, it sounds as if you're just making excuses. Why shouldn't workers be allowed to organize and have unions to represent their interests within a corporation?
Well, let me start and say I'm certainly not taking a position against the right to organize, and because I used to be an executive at a fairly large company that had employed one of the largest unions, the Teamsters. UPS employs hundreds of thousands of Teamsters, as well as the International Pilots Association and engineers and so on. So I'm not taking a position against labor. All I'm saying is that we are having a conversation as a society about what labor and the rules around labor should be. And the ethical thing to do is to have that conversation and to abide by the rules and the results of that conversation, no matter what they are. And to also have fair rules so that if we decide to change them as a society, everyone knows how we go about the process of changing the rules.
Well, again, let me ask you a very simple question. You talk about fairness. Is it fair to ban unions in your view?
That actually violates, in my view, a fundamental fairness of having a debate. Part of having a free and open society like we do in the United States and most of the Western world is that we can just make a decision today and we can change that decision tomorrow.
Again, you're dodging the question. Are you for or against unions?
Well, I don't think it's a matter of being for or against union. I've never been in a
half pregnant on unions. I'm very clear. I think every worker should have the right to join a union. What about you?
Well, I certainly think workers should have the right to organize. And that's the law of the land in the United States. But all I'm saying is that these things are not, these ethical questions that we struggle with every single day, they're not black and white. And they change as society changes and as our workforce changes. It used to be the case where Alan Dunlap, I believe his name was Alan Dunlap, Albert Dunlap, back in the 1990s, he was the CEO of Sunbeam. And he used to say his organizing principle was employees don't matter. The only thing that matters is shareholder value. And companies across the board used to generally hold to that view. But that wasn't always the case. You had people going as far back as Herbert Dow back in the 1916 and 1920s that said, look, we have to take care of employees and see that they're happy and contented, because that's the only thing that allows us to be an effective company. So time shifts the conversation, and ethical leaders are those who listen to the shift and adjust as society adjusts.
And finally, Andy, it's an interesting conversation. Could you give me some examples, either of contemporary or historical ethical leaders who you admire, for whom we could use as models for your ethical imperative?
Yes, I talked through a number of them in the book, and they come from all different indices. So some are religious leaders, some are judges like Chester Cole, some of them are religious leaders like Martin Luther King, some are scientific leaders. So I would say even contemporary, for example, I point to Jacinda Ardern, who did an amazing job during the COVID pandemic.
The former New Zealand Prime Minister.
That's correct. That's correct. Corey Berry at Best Buy. I made a point to include as many female leaders as well, because I believe our female leaders have something to say, and it is time for us to listen and hear.
Doesn't that go without saying?
Oh, absolutely. And it's time for us to hear them and listen.
And what about a major, you mentioned MLK and the New Zealand Prime Minister. What about a major corporate leader? Henry Ford, Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Andrew Carnegie. Do any of them provide models for your ethical imperative?
Well, I certainly point to someone like Jim Casey, who was a leader at UPS for many years. I had
who you work for, right?
No. I never worked for Casey, but he started the company. And one of the things that I enjoyed about Casey is that I did have a chance to meet Ken Jarvis, the first African-American package driver that he elevated at the company. And Jim Casey's point of view, he was no civil rights leader, but his point of view was that the people that represent my company have to represent the best of the communities that we serve in. And that put him opposite some leaders during a segregationist era in the United States, where he said, I'm going to break barriers. I'm going to hire and retain Black employees and employees of all walks of life, because they are going to enhance not only the bottom line, but because it's the right thing to do for that community we're serving.
And what is the civil rights issue of the 2020s, Andy? Finally, when it comes to the ethical imperative, I'm certainly not going to argue on that one with you, but is there something which is equivalent to perhaps the civil rights struggles of the 1960s in the 2020s? You talk in the book about inequality, increased profiteering. Is that the new, some people might say almost the new Jim Crow inequality?
I do believe that the enormous inequality that is being created between the haves and the have-nots, between the Silicon Valleys and the Walterboro, South Carolinas, it's going to get so extreme that it will cause problems. It will become a destabilizing force in the market. And I talk about how companies cannot operate in a destabilized environment. And that really keeps me up at night, where there are young people born at such a disadvantage that they will never be able to witness or see the same things that I have in life, because our society has become so fundamentally unfair and unequal. And mobility has gone down so significantly. There are children today, Gen Z, that are talking about homelessness and how they are afraid of being able to make decisions between food and housing. So I do think inequality is the civil rights argument of the day, is the civil rights issue, and it crosses gender, it crosses race, and it goes all across this country.
Well, Andrew C.M. Cooper, the author of The Ethical Imperative, you dealt with my obnoxious questions very well.
They were great.
Very interesting. And let's just remind everyone that the new book is just out, The Ethical Imperative, Leading with Conscience to Shape the Future of Business, just out, well worth reading. Best of luck, Andy, with everything. And next corporate leader I come across, I'm going to remind them that you said at least that they should be in the business of social engineering. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good to be with you.